What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana. Wow, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is June 5th, 2026, exactly 11:30 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 22nd book in our Book to React series, where we read an entire text cover to cover on live with the people to gain knowledge, not only for myself, but for your ass as well. And we are in Leon Trotsky's The History of the Russian Revolution. We're only 2 chapters away, including today's chapter, of finishing the first volume of this 3-volume epic tome covering the entire history, every single detail, every single person, every single event that was involved in the Russian Revolution. Trotsky is going over the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything that it took for the Russian people to overcome their wicked bourgeoisie that was sending them to the meat grinder in World War I and paying them pennies in those wicked factories and making the serfs or the peasants work on the land for practically nothing. And in our previous live stream, which we did today, Trotsky was actually talking about the peasantry and how the peasantry remained radical and was able to be persuaded by the Bolsheviks, the radical communists, the actual socialists in Russia, who actually wanted to see the working class, the working masses, take back control of their wealth. You get what I'm saying? Shout out to Kirkham Down Stalin up in the horizontal live stream. For the question in the horizontal live stream for today, we have rural Americans can be radicalized to adopt socialism. Kirkham Down Stalin says, I think yes, but accidentally picked 4, even though I think, yeah, fuck MAGA. Absolutely. It's always fuck MAGA. Fuck MAGA with as a staff, record label, and as a motherfucking crew. And if you down with MAGA, fuck you too. Donald Trump, fuck you too. Stephen Miller, fuck you too. Steve Bannon, fuck you too. My fofo, make sure all y'all kids don't grow. You motherfuckers mad because we got guns in our motherfucking belts. You know how it is. When we drop records, they felt. Anyway, man, I'm gonna continue with today's reading. This is our second reading for the day. We have both live streams going. I'll be responding to all comments from all sides. For today's reading, we will be reading chapter 21, Shifts in the Masses. Without further ado, let's go. In the 4th month of its existence, the February regime was already choking from its own contradictions. June had begun with the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, whose task was to create a political cover for the advance on the front. The beginning of the advance coincided in Petrograd with a gigantic demonstration of workers and soldiers organized by the compromisers against the Bolsheviks, but which turned out to be a Bolshevik demonstration against the compromisers. The growing indignation of the masses led, after 2 weeks, to another demonstration, which broke out without any summons from above, led to bloody encounters, and has gone into history under the name of the July Days. Taking place exactly halfway between the February and the October revolutions, the July semi-insurrection closes the former and constitutes a kind of dress rehearsal for the latter. On the threshold of the July Days, before passing over to those events whose arena in June was Petrograd, it is necessary to have a glance at certain processes that were taking place in the masses. So once again, I know a lot of us already know how this story ends. We're waiting for the October Revolution, the big revolution to pop off, where the Bolsheviks seize power entirely, and then that's also the beginning of the Russian Civil War as well. We're waiting for that to come, and I know a lot of this might be redundant or superfluous for people that are already Marxist or already communist or socialist to be hearing this, but I do think it's important for us to learn this, even though these past few chapters have been hard to read, because Trotsky is going over things that a lot of us just sort of skip over when we think about Russian revolutionary history. Let's continue here. To a certain liberal who had affirmed at the beginning of May that the more the government moves to the left, the more the country moves to the right, meaning by country, of course, the possessing classes, Lenin replied, the country of workers and poorer peasants, I assure you, citizen, is 1,000 times farther to the left than the Chernovs and the Tsetsarelis, and 100 times farther than we. Live a little and you will see. Lenin estimated that the workers and the peasants were 100 times farther to the left than the Bolsheviks. This may seem a little unfounded. The workers and soldiers were still supporting the compromisers, and the majority of them were on their guard against the Bolsheviks. But Lenin was delving deeper. The social interest of the masses, their hatred and their hope, were still only seeking a mode of expression. The policy of the compromisers had been for them a first stage. The masses were immeasurably to the left of the Chernovs and Tsatsarellis, but were themselves still unconscious of their radicalism. Lenin was right in asserting that the masses were to the left of the Bolsheviks, for the party in its immense majority had not yet realized the mightiness of the revolutionary passions that were simmering in the depths of the awakening people. The indignation of the masses was nourished by the dragging out of the war, the economic ruin, and the malicious inactivity of the government. So, once again, Trotsky and Lenin are speaking to us from the past, well from beyond the grave. And both of them are telling us something that we should be noticing in America right now. The average American, even though some of them might express reactionary views, let's just say this, not even really reactionary views, because true reactionary views are the ideas that billionaires should be protected, that wealth should remain with the 1%, that the richest people in the world deserve their wealth, and we don't make it. That's a really reactionary view. People's views on a lot of issues are just plain uninformed, and in other words, stupid. When people are talking bad about trans people, when people are saying homophobic or racist things, when people are being xenophobic or extremely nationalistic, they're just confused. They're just really fucking deluded and stupid. A lot of people have no literacy. A lot of people have no capacity to actually learn. A lot of people are really fucking stupid. As we know in America, only about 33% of Americans have a bachelor's degree at minimum. And a lot of Americans are dropping out of high school, and we're going to continue to see more and more people dropping out of high school and fewer people attaining college degrees in the upcoming years because of the economic insecurity that has been placed upon us in this neoliberal government. So a lot of people actually are pretty radical. Most Americans do actually want free healthcare. Most Americans actually do want universal free college education. Most Americans do want a higher standard of living and higher wages, wages commensurate with the value that they create for their billionaire bosses. Millionaire bosses if you work for an SME. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, I'm just going to say this. Most people actually are to the left when we actually think about it. And the true left is the economic left. All right? So, shout out to everybody up in the live stream. Shout out to Dark Sheol. He says, yo, bruh. If you come in here, if you want to be a part of this tribe, you got to say, what's going on, comrade? What's happening, comrade? That's the way we talk around here. Not, yo, bruh. We're here to lift consciousness, man. But shout out to you. Anyway, MR Ali 7 says, hi, Unc, what are you saying? You can click the description of the video. It's either up or down. You can find it and find out what we are talking about here in this live stream. I'm going to continue here. The measureless European Asiatic plain had become a country only thanks to railroads. The war struck them most heavily of all. Transport was steadily breaking down. The number of disabled locomotives on certain roads had reached 50%. At headquarters, learned engineers read reports to the effect that no later than in 6 months, the railroad transport would be in a state of complete paralysis. In these calculations, there was a certain amount of conscious spreading of panic. But the breakdown of transport had really reached threatening dimensions. It had created tie-ups on the roads, intensified the disturbance of commodity exchange, and augmented the high cost of living. The food situation in the cities was becoming worse and worse. The agrarian movement had established its center in 43 provinces. The flow of grain to the army and the towns was dangerously dwindling. In the more fertile regions, to be sure, there were still tens and thousands of millions of poods of surplus grain. Millions of pounds. That must be a typo. What is a pood? I don't think a pood is a word, even in Russian. Let's read that again. In the more fertile regions, to be sure, there were still tens and hundreds of millions of pounds of surplus grain. But the purchasing operations at a fixed price gave extremely unsatisfactory results. And, moreover, it was difficult to deliver the ready grain to the centers owing to the breakdown of transport. From the autumn of 1916 on, an average of about 1/2 of the expected provision trains arrived at the front. Petrograd, Moscow, and other industrial centers received no more than 10% of what they needed. They had almost no reserves. The standard of living in the city masses oscillated between undernourishment and hunger. The arrival of the coalition government was signalized with a democratic order forbidding the baking of white bread. It will be several years after that before the French roll will again appear in the capital. There was not enough butter. In June, the consumption of sugar was cut down by definite rationing for the whole country. The mechanism of the market, broken by the war, had not been replaced by that state regulation to which the advanced capitalist governments had been compelled to resort, and which alone permitted Germany to hold on through 4 years of war. Threatening symptoms of economic collapse appeared at every step. The fall in productivity in the factories was caused, aside from the breakdown of transport, by the wearing out of equipment, the lack of raw materials and supplies, the flux of personnel, bad financing, and finally, the universal uncertainty. The principal plants were still working for the war. Orders had been distributed for 2 or 3 years ahead. Meantime, the workers were unwilling to believe that the war would continue. The newspapers were publishing appalling figures of war profits. The cost of living was rising. The workers were awaiting a change. The technical and administrative personnel of the factories were uniting in unions and advancing their demands. In the sphere, the Mensheviks and Social Revolutionaries dominated. The regime of the factories was disintegrating. All joints were weakening. The prospects of the war and of the national economy were becoming misty, and property rights unreliable. Profits were falling, dangers growing, the bosses losing their taste for protection under the conditions created by the revolution. The bourgeoisie as a whole was entering upon a policy of economic defeatism. Temporary losses and deficits due to economic paralysis were in their eyes the overhead expenses of a struggle with the revolution that threatened the foundations of culture. At the same time, the virtuous press was accusing the workers from day to day of maliciously sabotaging industry, stealing raw materials, unnecessarily burning up fuel in order to produce stoppages. The falsity of these accusations exceeded all bounds. And since this was the press of a party which actually stood at the head of the coalition power, the indignation of the workers naturally transferred itself to the Provisional Government. So, this here reminds me, or makes me think about, right now, how the U.S. is threatening to invade Cuba. And in America right now, we've been at war. My whole entire life, as an American, we have been involved in some foreign conflict. And thankfully, none of those foreign conflicts bankrupted the American government. Because imagine if I grew up in, the disintegration of the empire. It would have been Mad Max, hell on earth, especially growing up in Louisiana, where there are probably more guns than people, just in the vicinity of northern Louisiana, right? So imagine the Mad Max situation that could have been. But in Russia at this time, they were running low on food. The government is running out of money for the war. People are starving, you know what I'm saying? And I can definitely see this happening should America happen to invade Cuba. If we really go through with invading Cuba and putting boots on the ground and the Cuban people put up a fight, I know it's a small country, but it's their country. And there's one thing Americans are good at, it's losing away games. There's nothing more Americans love to do than losing away games fighting brown people on their turf. So I could definitely see America facing a very tough insurgency in the mountains and in the swamps of Cuba, and that could, I think, hypothetically, bankrupt the American empire. That's what I think. If American soldiers start dying in Cuba 90 miles off the coast of Florida and body bags start coming back, meanwhile at the same time we're raining down hellfire in Iran and giving away billions of dollars to Israel, meanwhile standards of living continue to drop in America, it's $20 for a Big Mac meal at McDonald's, I'm pretty sure we might be in revolutionary Russian times in America, should that happen. But it's up to the Cuban people to put up a fight. It's up to the Cuban people to put up the fight, and also leftists in America to seize that moment. We have to seize that moment, seize that opportunity, and put the devil to rest, if you know what I mean. I'm going to continue here. The industrialists had not forgotten the experience of 1905, when a correctly organized lockout actively supported by the government had not only broken up the struggle of the workers for an 8-hour day, but also had rendered the monarchy an invaluable service in the matter of wiping out the revolution. Let's read that again. The industrialists had not forgotten the experience of 1905, when a correctly organized lockout actively supported by the government had not only broken up the struggle of the workers for an 8-hour day, but also had rendered the monarchy an invaluable service in the matter of wiping out the revolution. Shout out to Hammerman up in the live stream. Salute to you and everybody else tuning in. Continuing here. The question of a lockout was now again brought up for a discussion at a council of the Congress of Industry and Trade. Thus, innocently, they named the fighting organ of trustified and syndicated capital. One of the leaders of industry, the engineer Auerbach, explained later in his memoirs why the idea of a lockout was rejected. This would have looked like a blow at the rear of the army. The consequences of such a step in the absence of governmental support looked to the majority very dark. The whole misfortune lay in the absence of a real government. The provisional government was paralyzed by the Soviet. The reasonable leaders of the Soviet were paralyzed by the masses. The workers in the factory were armed. Moreover, almost every factory had in the neighborhood a friendly regiment or battalion. In these circumstances, these gentlemen industrialists considered a lockout odious in its national aspect. But they did not by any means renounce the idea of an offensive, but merely adapted it to existing circumstances, giving it not a simultaneous but a creeping character. According to the diplomatic expression of Auerbach, the industrialists finally came to the conclusion that an object lesson would be given by life itself in the form of an inevitable gradual closing of the factories, so to speak, one at a time, a thing which soon did actually occur. In other words, renouncing a demonstrative lockout as involving an enormous responsibility. This Council of the United Industries recommended to its members to close up the enterprises one at a time, seeking out a respectable pretext. This plan of a creeping lockout was carried out with remarkable system. Leaders of capital like the Cadet Cutler, a former minister in the cabinet of Witt, read significant reports about the breakdown of industry, laying the blame not on the 3 years of war, but on the 3 months of revolution. In the course of 2 or 3 weeks, prophesied the impatient newspaper Wretch, the shops and factories will begin to shut down one after another. A threat was here dressed up in the form of a prophecy. Engineers, professors, journalists started a campaign in both the general and specialized press in which a bridling of the workers was presented as the fundamental condition of salvation. The minister industrialist Konovalov had declared on the 17th of May, just before his demonstrative withdrawal from the government, if there does not soon come a sobering up of cloudy heads, we will witness a stoppage of tens and hundreds of plants. Does this not sound like today in America? Does this not sound like today in America, where companies say if you dare raise the minimum wage to a living wage, to $20 an hour, $25 an hour, $30 an hour for Starbucks workers, fast food workers, hotel workers, all the people that work in the service industry, which is pretty much all of us. Pretty much all of us. Because you can get a 4-year bachelor's degree and come out doing valet at Marriott, like your boy. And like many other Americans out there, struggling with student loan debt and coming out of university, getting a job at Chick-fil-A. And what do the owners of Chick-fil-A and Marriott and McDonald's and Starbucks say? Don't you dare unionize. Don't you dare raise the minimum wage to $20, $30, $40 an hour so that people could actually buy the shit that they make here or book a room at the Marriott. Don't you dare do that, because if you do, we're going to have to go out of business. It doesn't matter that, the CEO last year just had a, $30 million golden parachute when he got caught in a sex scandal. It doesn't matter that last year our shareholders walked away with record buybacks and profits from their shares in the company. It doesn't matter that we're more concerned about our shareholders than our stakeholders in American capitalism. Don't you dare raise the minimum wage. Does this not sound the same, man? What they were doing in Russia is basically saying like, hey, that revolution was fun, but we're going to have to close down the factories if these workers don't chill. Fuck you. Kill the fucking boss. Kill your fucking boss and manager. For real. And the landlord too. Take them in the city square, hang them by their knees, and gut them from groin to chain. Continuing here. In the middle of June, a Congress of Trade and Industry demands of the Provisional Government a radical break with the system of developing the revolution. We have already heard this demand made by the generals. Stop the revolution, but the industrialists make it more concise. The source of evil is not only in the Bolsheviks, but also the socialist parties. Only a firm iron hand can save Russia. Having prepared the political setting, the industrialists passed from words to deeds. In the course of March and April, 129 small plants involving 9,000 workers were shut down. In May, 108 with a like number of workers. In June, 125 plants with 38,000 workers were shut down. In July, 206 plants threw out on the streets 48,000 workers. The lockout developed in a geometric progression. But that was only a beginning. Textile Moscow got into motion after Petrograd, and the provinces after Moscow. The manufacturers would refer to an absence of fuel, raw materials, accessories, credits. The factory committees would interfere in the matter, and in many cases indubitably establish the fact of a malicious dislocation of industry with the goal of bringing pressure on the workers, or holding up the government for subsidies. Especially impudent were the foreign capitalists acting through the mediation of their embassies. In several cases, the sabotage was so obvious that as a result of the exposures of the shop committees, the industrialists found themselves compelled to reopen the factories, thus laying bare one contradiction after the other. The revolution soon arrived at the chief of them all, that between the social character of industry and the private ownership of its tools and equipment, in the interest of victory over the workers, the entrepreneur closes the factory as though it were a question of a mere snuff box and not an enterprise necessary to the life of the whole nation. Goddamn, this reminds me of a story that I heard on Roland Martin's channel. Recently, in Maryland, there was an Apple store where all of the workers decided to form a union. The workers all voted for it. It took them many years to get their paperwork right and to get sanctioned by the government and everything. And guess what Apple decided to do? When these workers, mostly black workers, decided to unionize, what did they do? Shut down the fucking Apple store. If Apple could not be a more evil company. Ironic that I'm saying this now on an iPhone, but luckily I bought this iPhone secondhand and didn't give any more profit to that wicked company. But goddamn, does this not sound the same? In Russia at this time, the factory owners just decided maliciously to put 48,000, hundreds of thousands actually, when you count up all the numbers of people, 48,000 families out of work. Think about that, just because they hated this revolutionary fervor. Going to show that if we're going to really put our foot on the gas to get this, some real sacrifices are going to have to be made. Some pain will be felt by the workers, but we have to come together as a community to actually say we're going to look out for each other when inevitably we lose our jobs, when we're fired, when we're blacklisted from industries or companies, etc., etc. It's coming sooner than later. The banks, having successfully boycotted the Liberty Loan, took a militant attitude against fiscal encroachment on big capital. In a letter addressed to the Ministry of Finance, the bankers prophesied a flow of capital abroad and a transfer of papers to the safes in case of radical financial reforms. In other words, the banker patriots threatened a financial lockout to complete the industrial one. The government hastened to accede. After all, the organizers of this sabotage were respected people who had been compelled as the result of the war and the revolution to risk their capital, and not any old Kronstadt sailors who risked nothing but their heads. Some sarcasm from Trotsky right there. The executive committee could not fail to understand that the responsibility for the economic fate of the country, especially since the open association of the socialists in the government, would lie in the eyes of the masses upon the ruling Soviet majority. The economic department of the executive committee had worked out a broad program of state regulation of the economic life. Under pressure of the threatening situation, the proposals of every moderate economist have proved much more radical than their authors. For many branches of industry, read this program, the time is ripe for a state trade monopoly: bread, meat, salt, leather. For others, the conditions are ripe for the formation of regulating state trust: coal, oil, metal, sugar, paper. And finally, for almost all branches of industry, contemporary conditions demand a regulative participation of the state in the distribution of raw materials and finished products, and also in the fixation of prices. Simultaneously with this, it is necessary to place under control all credit institutions. On May 16th, the Executive Committee, with its bewildered political leadership, adopted the proposals of the economist almost without debate and backed them up with a unique warning addressed to the government. It should take upon itself the task of a planned organization of the national industry and labor, calling to memory that in consequence of the non-fulfillment of this task, the old regime fell and it had been necessary to reorganize the Provisional Government. In order to pump up this courage, the compromisers were scaring themselves. The program is excellent, wrote Lenin, both the control and the governmentalizing of the trust. Also, the struggle with speculation and liability for labor. It is necessary to recognize this program of frightful Bolshevism, for no other program and no other way out of the actually threatening terrible collapse can be found. However, the whole question was, who was to carry out this excellent program? Would it be the coalition? The answer was given immediately. The day after the adoption by the Executive Committee of the economic program, the Minister of Trade and Industry, Konovalov, resigned and slammed the door behind him. He was temporarily replaced by the engineer Palchinsky, a no less loyal but more energetic representative of big capital. The Minister Socialists did not even dare seriously propose the program of the Executive Committee to their liberal colleagues. Chernov, you remember, was vainly trying to get the government to adopt a veto on land sales. In answer to its growing difficulties, the government, on its side, brought forward a program of unloading Petrograd, that is, transferring shops and factories into the depths of the country. This program was motivated both by military considerations, the danger that the Germans might seize the capital, and by economic. Petrograd was too far from the sources of fuel and raw materials. This unloading would have meant the liquidation of the Petrograd industries for a series of months and years. The political aim was to scatter throughout the whole country the vanguard of the working class. Parallel with this, the military power brought forward one pretext after another for deporting from Petrograd the revolutionary military units. Palchinsky tried with all his might to convince the workers' section of the Soviet of the advantages of an unloading. To accomplish this task against the will of the workers was impossible, but the workers would not agree. The unloading scheme got forward as little as the regulation of industry. The breakdown was going deeper. Prices were rising. The silent lockout was broadening, and therewith unemployment. The government was marking time. Milikov wrote later, the ministry was simply swimming with the current, and the current was running in the Bolshevik channel. Yes, the current was running in the Bolshevik channel. So, this is very, very interesting right here, and I'm about to nerd out a little bit and have a mini rant, but it sounds like, to me, it sounds like what was happening at this time in pre-revolutionary Russia, in this interregnum between the February Revolution and the October Revolution. What was happening is that there was counter-revolution from the top down. The bourgeoisie, this coalition government that existed between the old monarchists and these new radical socialists, the Mensheviks and Social Revolutionaries, and some right-wing Bolsheviks, aka communists. They're trying to get along to maintain some resemblance of the status quo while presenting some change to society, right? And one of their ways was to try to, if I'm understanding right here, their goal was essentially to nationalize all the industries. Very interesting. because you would think that would not be in the interest of people who are capitalists. Capitalists, by definition, want to be able to privatize industries. They want to own coal mines and sugar plantations, and they want to be able to have large factories where the government doesn't interfere. They can treat their workers however they want and reap enormous profits. But essentially, the government was saying the only way that we can control this situation, and also because we're in wartime, is to seize the means of production. What did Lenin say about this to these, right-wingers, essentially, who are saying that, yeah, we need to seize the means of production for the state? Lenin said, that's pretty fucking cool. I like that idea, honestly. And it kind of makes me think about how in America, right, in the 1990s, Bill Clinton and these third-wave Democrats, they were able to get away with basically fucking the American worker hard in the ass through NAFTA. Basically shipping all the jobs away to Mexico and India, right? Essentially. And breaking up the fucking unions, right? They were able to do that essentially because the 90s were generally pretty good time. Generally a pretty good time. Reagan had, started neoliberalism, breaking away the unions like he did with PATCO, and, neoliberalism was slowly creeping in. We started to see the deterioration of working conditions in America and throughout the Western world, but it was still slow, and people were still living off the high of beating the Soviet Union, and, generally, incomes were high, the middle class, as we understand it, was strong, etc. So they got away pretty quickly with fucking the middle class through NAFTA. This was essentially the same idea that the people at the time, the bourgeoisie in Russia, were trying to do, talking about unloading, seizing the means of production of the factories so that they could break up the workers' unions and then ship the workers everywhere across the country. Sort of like how we are now in America. Everybody's isolated. Everybody works at laptops. Some people work from home and never see their co-workers. We have no unionized real labor movement. Everything's sort of been dispersed, disseminated, and become ephemeral in the air. You know what I mean? And that's sort of like what was happening. But the difference is why it didn't work in Russia, why essentially proto-neoliberalism did not work in Russia at this time, is because they were going through hell. It wasn't like the good 90s in America where generally there was a strong middle class and people had money in their pockets. You could take the kids to Disneyland and buy them a Nintendo, whatever. You get what I'm saying? Like, at this time, people were literally starving. Bread was scarce, you know what I mean? People were rationing sugar, shit like that. And so I find it very interesting. Once again, this is a very interesting parallel how, number one, a lot of governments, whether they claim to be capitalist, socialist, whatever, when it's wartime, everybody wants to seize the means of production. The factory should go to the state. The ways of growing food and surplusing food need to go to the state, etc., etc. It's a very interesting thing that both systems seem to want to consolidate the means of production. But the interest of the capitalists when seizing the means of production for the bourgeois state is to make sure that they are the first ones to have their hands in the pot to reap the benefits of the means of production being seized. Unlike the socialists who want to make sure that the means of production being seized, make sure that the workers' hands are all in the pot, making sure that they reap the benefits of the value that they create. I digress. That was a very long tangent that I went on, but I found those 3 paragraphs right there highly interesting, and I would love to know what anybody thinks about them if you are watching this or reading this, but I will continue. The proletariat was the chief motive force of the revolution. At the same time, the revolution was giving shape to the proletariat, and the proletariat was badly in need of this. We have observed the decisive role of the Petrograd workers in the February days. The most militant positions were occupied by the Bolsheviks. Immediately after the overturn, however, the Bolsheviks retired into the background. The compromise parties advanced to the front of the political stage. They turned over the power to the liberal bourgeoisie. Patriotism was the countersign of this bloc. Its assault was so strong that at least one half of the leaders of the Bolshevik party capitulated to it. With Lenin's arrival, the course of the party changed abruptly, and thereafter its influence grew swiftly. In the armed April demonstration, the front ranks of the workers and soldiers were already trying to break the chains of the compromisers. But after a first effort, they fell back. The compromisers remained at the helm. Later on, after the October Revolution, a good deal was written to the effect that the Bolsheviks owed their victory to the peasant army, tired of the war. That is a very superficial explanation. The opposite statement would be nearer to the truth. If the compromisers got a dominant position in the February Revolution, it is thanks most of all to the unusual place occupied in the life of the country by a peasant army. If the revolution had developed in peacetime, the leading role of the proletariat would have had from the beginning a far more sharply expressed character. Without the war, the revolutionary victory would have come later, and if you do not count the victims of the war, would have been paid for at a higher price. But it would not have left a place for an inundation of compromising and patriotic moods. At any rate, the Russian Marxists, who had prophesied long before these events a conquest of power by the proletariat in the course of the bourgeois revolution, did not take for that starting point the temporary moods of a peasant army, but the class structure of the Russian society. That prophecy was wholly confirmed. But the fundamental correlation of classes was refracted through the war and temporarily shifted by the pressure of the army, that is, by an organization of declassed and armed peasants. It was just this artificial social formation that so extraordinarily strengthened the hold of the petty bourgeois compromise policy and made possible an 8 months period of experiments, weakening to the country and the revolution. So what Trotsky is essentially saying there is that had World War I not happened or Russia not been involved in World War I, he believes the revolution would have still happened, but it would have come later. Had the revolution come during peacetime, there would have been a sharper struggle and a more strident proletariat working class who would have been more ardent in their demands. But because the war was so tragic for the Russian people, because this war was so brutal, so many people were losing lives, so many people were starving to death because of these wicked bourgeois monarchists and capitalists who were reaping the profits of the blood of the Russian people. They were willing to compromise. That's why between February and October, Trotsky is writing chapter after chapter of what I characterize as revisionism, reformism. But really, Trotsky is being generous here. He is understanding that the will of the people was to see some resolution by any means necessary without jumping the gun, literally going to, killing people without, they did some killing on February, right? They ran up in, some police stations, overturned some cars, some cops and commanders got killed. Okay, but that was light work. So what Trotsky is saying here is that the people were ready to compromise and do some experimentation with changing the system if that would lead to a better outcome, because this war had damaged so many people. All right, I'm country as hell. I'm from Louisiana, baby. I drink out of a mason jar. So I need a water break. Yeah, I'm from the country, baby. We drink out of mason jars. Don't you dare throw away that tomato can. Anyway. Sorry, man. Let's continue here. However, the question as to the roots of compromisism is not exhausted by reference to the peasant army. In the proletariat itself, in its makeup, its political level, we must seek supplementary causes for the temporary entrenchment of the Mensheviks and Social Revolutionaries. The war brought vast changes in the constitution and mood of the working class. If the preceding years had been a time of revolutionary afflux, the war sharply broke off that process. The mobilization was thought out and conducted not only from a military, but still more from a police viewpoint. The government made haste to clean out from the industrial districts the more active and restless groups of workers. We may consider it established that the mobilization of the first months of war tore away from the industries as many as 40% of the workers. chiefly the skilled workers, their absence having a very damaging effect on the course of production, called out hot protest from the industrialists in proportion to their high profits from the war industries. A further destruction of the workers' cadres was thus stopped. The workers indispensable to the industries remained in the capacity of men on military duty. The breaches affected by the mobilization were made up by immigrants from the villages, small town people, badly qualified workers, women, boys. The percentage of women in industry rose from 32 to 40%. All right. So shout out to Hammerman. People don't like history, but history is the truth. Shout out to Hammerman up in the live stream supporting. Absolutely true. Yeah. And also anybody else up in the live stream who is outside listening right now and you got any comments, I would love to hear what you think about this text. So yeah, continuing here. Trotsky says, the process of renewal and dilution of the proletariat reached its extreme dimensions in the capital. For the years of the war, 1914 to 1917, the number of workers in large enterprises, those hiring more than 500, almost doubled in the Petrograd province in consequence of the liquidation of plants and factories in Poland, and especially in the Baltic states, and still more in consequence of the general growth of the war industries. There were concentrated in Petrograd by 1917 about 400,000 workers in plants and factories. Out of these, 335,000 were in the 140 giant plants. The more militant elements of the Petrograd proletariat played no small part at the front in giving form to the revolutionary moods of the army. But those yesterday's immigrants from the villages who replaced them, often well-to-do peasants and shopkeepers hiding from the front, women and boys, were far more submissive than the ranking workers. To this, we must add that the qualified workers who found themselves in the position of men on military duty, and of these there were hundreds of thousands, observed an extraordinary caution through fear of being thrown over to the front. Such was the social basis of the patriotic mood, which had prevailed with the part of the workers even under the Tsar. Very interesting. How I interpret that right there is Trotsky is saying, like, this war was very brutal. They were sending young men who were in the cities, also in the villages, out to the front lines, many of them very skilled workers, and this caused a depletion in the productivity of the workers in the major industrial towns in Russia, right? And to fill this depletion of workers, to fill this deficit of the working class, many of the poor rural people start moving to the cities. Some of these people were just, people trying to keep their heads low and hide from going to the front, hide from being drafted, and other people, were just trying to make a living, seek a better life. And so what Trotsky is saying here is that, people that supported the status quo, hid their views as being patriotic, right? We want to keep things as they are because we love Mother Russia, right? But really, what does patriotism come from? It comes from fear. You know what I'm saying? Patriotism, extreme nationalism comes from a type of fear. Fear of change, fear of you being displaced, fear of things becoming different and you not having bread on the table, a roof over your head, etc., which are very real fears. I pay rent here, I pay for the lights here, I pay for the water here, electricity and everything like that, and I don't want my standard of living to go down at all. But what I do actually want is for people's standard of living who don't have the things that I work very hard for to have them too, which is not what our capitalistic, neoliberal, globalized system is made to do. So that's why we won't change as socialists and communists. But very interesting what Trotsky is making a point here. Patriotism, the idea of extreme nationalism, is really bound up in fear. When people wave that flag, or when people say, I love my country and I want it to never change, it's really coming from a place of fear. Very interesting what Trotsky is saying here. Continuing. But there was no stability in this patriotism. The merciless military and police repression, the redoubled exploitation, defeats at the front, and industrial breakdown pushed the workers into the struggle. Strikers during the war were predominantly economic in character, however, and distinguished by far more moderation than before the war. The weakening of the class was increased by the weakening of its party. After the arrest and exile of the Bolshevik Duma deputies, there was carried out with the help of a previously prepared hierarchy of provocateurs a general smash-up of the Bolshevik organizations, from which the party did not recover until the February Revolution. During 1915 and 1916, the diluted working class had to go through an elementary school of struggle before the partial economic strikes and demonstrations of hungry women could, in February 1917, fuse in a general strike and draw the army into an insurrection. The Petrograd proletariat thus entered the February Revolution not only in a heterogeneous condition, not yet having amalgamated its constituent parts, but with a lowered political level even of its advanced layers. In the provinces, it was still worse. It was this revival of political illiteracy and semi-illiteracy in the proletariat caused by the war, which created the second condition necessary for the temporary dominance of the compromise parties. A revolution teaches and teaches fast. In that lies its strength. Every week brings something new to the masses. Every 2 months creates an epoch. At the end of February, the insurrection. At the end of April, a demonstration of the armed workers and soldiers in Petrograd. At the beginning of July, a new assault far broader in scope and under more resolute slogans. At the end of August, Kornilov's attempt at an overthrow beaten by the masses. At the end of October, conquest by power of the Bolsheviks. Under these events, so striking in their rhythm, molecular processes were taking place, welding the heterogeneous parts of the working class into one political whole. In this, again, the chief role was played by the strike. This makes me think about, what is Isaac Newton's law? I think it's the first law of thermodynamics. What stays in motion, what is put in motion stays in motion in a vacuum. And what Trotsky is saying here is that once that revolutionary ball got to rolling, once things started snowballing, pause, if you know what I mean. Once things started snowballing, it couldn't be stopped. And a revolution teaches, and it teaches fast. There are so many quotes Trotsky drops in this thing. He just be sprinkling so much game on a young nigga. You feel me? He going hard with the pen, man. I wish I could be a great writer like Trotsky one day. He a boss with it, for real, for real. But yeah, basically what Trotsky is saying here is like, you know, the working class went through hell before the October Revolution. You know what I mean? They were sent out to the wars. The peasants and the working class were, you know, being thrown to the meat grinder on the front lines of World War I. You know what I'm saying? They came back to low wages, etc., etc. And so the Bolsheviks, the socialists, you know what I mean? The people that already had it in their mind that it's possible for a better society to be created, where the working class have the means of production and the wealth that they create is then generated into their profits for themselves rather than to the capitalists, the billionaires, the owners, etc., etc. The people had to be retrained, retaught. Them pamphlets had to be passed out. Propaganda had to be done so the consciousness of the people could rise. That was all a part of the struggle, as Trotsky is saying here. Continued. Frightened by the lightning of revolution striking in the midst of their bacchanalia of war profits, the industrialists made concessions in the first weeks to the workers. The Petrograd factory owners even agreed, with qualifications and expectations, to the 8-hour day. But that did not quiet things, since the standard of living continually sank. In May, the executive committee was obliged to concede that with the increasing cost of living, the situation of the workers borders for many categories upon chronic starvation. The mood in the workers' districts was becoming more and more nervous and tense. What depressed them most of all was the absence of prospects. The masses are capable of enduring the heaviest deprivations when they understand what for. But the new regime was more and more revealing itself to them as a mere camouflage of the old relations against which they had revolted in February. This they would not endure. The strikes were especially stormy among the more backward and exploited groups of workers: laundry workers, dyers, coopers, trade and industrial clerks, structural workers, bronze workers, unskilled workers, shoemakers, paper box makers, sausage makers. Furniture workers were striking, layer after layer, throughout the month of June. Imagine being on strike and you work in a sausage factory. Pause, no diddy. But, boys, I've had enough of this shit. I'm sick of making sausages and my pinkies end up in the grinder. Boys, we're going on strike. Boys, I'm tired of getting paid in frankfurters. This motherfucker really paid me with a check and a Frankfurter. Sausage makers is hilarious. Was that a major industry? Is sausage making really a major Russian industry, or was it? That's insane. I'm sorry. Sorry I got a bit silly right there. It just came out of nowhere. It came out of nowhere. The sausage makers were on strike. Anyway, the metal workers were beginning, on the contrary, to play a restraining role. To the advanced workers, it was becoming more and more clear that individual economic strikes in the conditions of war, breakdown, and inflation could not bring a serious improvement, that there must be some change in the very foundations. The lockout not only made the workers favorable to the demand for the control of industry, but even pushed them toward the thought of the necessity of taking the factories into the hands of the state. This inference seemed the more natural in that the majority of private factories were working for the war, and that alongside them were state enterprises of the same type. Already in the summer of 1917, delegations began to arrive in the capital from the far ends of Russia, delegations of workers and clerks, with the plea that the factories should be taken over by the treasury, since the shareholders had stopped financing them. But the government would not hear this. Consequently, it was necessary to change the government. Let's read that again. That's just funny. That's just funny. Trotsky's just a funny dude. Already in the summer of 1917, delegations began to arrive in the capital from the far ends of Russia, delegations of workers and clerks, with a plea that the factories should be taken over by the treasury, since the shareholders had stopped financing them. But the government would not hear of this. Consequently, it was necessary to change the government. The compromisers opposed this. The workers began to shift their front against the compromisers. The Putilov factory, with its 40,000 workers, was a stronghold of the Social Revolutionaries during the first months of the revolution, but its garrison did not long defend it against Bolsheviks. At the head of the Bolshevik attack most often was to be seen Volodarsky, a tailor in the past. At the head of the Bolshevik attack, most often was to be seen Volodarsky, a tailor in the past. A Jew who had spent some years in America and spoke English well, Volodarsky was a magnificent mass orator, logical, ingenious, and bold. His American intonation gave a unique expressiveness to his resonant voice, ringing out concisely at meetings of many thousands. From the moment of his arrival in the Narva district, says the worker Mensheviks, the ground in the Putilov factory began to slip under the feet of the social revolutionary gentlemen, and in the course of something like 2 months, the Putilov workers had gone over to the Bolsheviks. The growth of strikes and of the class struggle in general almost automatically raised the influence of the Bolsheviks. In all cases where it was a question of life interest, the workers became convinced that the Bolsheviks had no ulterior motives, that they were concealing nothing, and that you could rely on them. In the hours of conflict, all the workers tended toward the Bolsheviks, the non-party workers, the social revolutionaries, the Mensheviks. This is explained by the fact that the factory and the shop committees, waging a struggle for the life of their factories against the sabotage of the administration and the proprietors, went over to the Bolsheviks much sooner than the Soviet. At a conference of the factory and shop committees of Petrograd and its environs at the beginning of June, the Bolshevik resolution won 335 out of 421 votes. This fact went by utterly unnoticed in the big newspapers. Nevertheless, it meant that in the fundamental questions of economic life, the Petrograd proletariat, not yet having broken with the compromisers, had nevertheless as a fact gone over to the Bolsheviks. At the June Conference of Trade Unions, it became known that in Petrograd there were over 50 unions with no less than 250,000 members. The Metalworkers Union numbered about 100,000 workers. Its membership had doubled in the course of the 1 month of May. The influence of the Bolsheviks in the Union had grown still more swiftly. All the by-elections to the Soviets showed a victory for the Bolsheviks. By the 1st of June in the Moscow Soviet, there were already 206 Bolsheviks against 176 Mensheviks and 110 Social Revolutionaries. The same shifts occurred in the provinces, only more slowly. The membership of the party was growing steadily. At the end of April, the Petrograd organization had 15,000 members. By the end of June, over 32,000. The workers section of the Petrograd Soviet had at that time already a Bolshevik majority, but at a joint session of both sections, the soldier delegates overweighed the Bolsheviks. Pravda was more and more insistently demanding general elections. The 500,000 Petrograd workers have 4 times fewer delegates in the Soviet than the 150,000 soldiers of the Petrograd garrison. At the June Congress of the Soviets, Lenin demanded serious measures of struggle against lockouts, plunderings, and organized disruption of economic life on the part of the industrialists and bankers. Publish the profits of the capitalist gentlemen. After arrest 50 or 100 of the biggest millionaires, it will be enough to hold them for a few weeks, even on such privileged terms as Nicholas Romanov is held, with the simple aim of compelling them to reveal the threads, the tricky manipulations, the filth, and selfishness, which even under the new government are costing our country millions. Damn. To the Soviet leaders, Lenin's proposal seemed monstrous. You imagine that you can alter the laws of economic life by acts of violence against individual capitalists? The circumstances that these industrialists were dictating by laws by way of a conspiracy against the nation was considered a part of the due order of things. Kerensky, who came down on Lenin with thunderous indignation, did not hesitate a month later to arrest many thousands of workers who differed with the industrialists in their understanding of the laws of economic life. Lenin was a badass. This is the type of rhetoric we should be using now. Kareth said pause. I don't know why he said pause. Maybe it's to the sausage factories. But I'll say this about what Lenin said. That's some badass shit. Arrest the millionaires. Arrest your bosses. Arrest the professional managerial class. Arrest, all those people that are the bloodsuckers of the poor. The top 1%. Find them, capture them, kidnap them. That's what Lenin was saying. Against this poor, helpless minority. The people that own the wealth of the nation and are war profiteers. Now, we are against adventurism, and I do not support anybody doing any type of violence or crime to anybody. I do not support you doing any type of crime or violence to anybody. Do not hurt anybody. Do not arrest anybody. Do not kidnap a billionaire. Do not do that. I got something in my eye, bruh. I got something in my eye. Fuck. Anyway. Very interesting what he's saying here. And, it sounds like what happened in Russia, some of the workers actually did start kidnapping their bosses and kidnapping the millionaires. They started kidnapping a lot of those rich people. And then the government starts cracking down and arresting the workers. So take that for what you will. We need to be learning from all types of revolutionary movements. A few months ago, I read The Thorn in the Carnation by Yahya al-Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, a delicious brand of Gaza food. He was the founder of Hamas, and he gave us a lot of game on revolutionary tactics that we can use out in the field when we're putting in work against our top ops, to say the least. Shout out to Hammerman up in the factories. Kirkland Down Silent says sausage factories, crying. Okay, y'all are slow, man. I said that like 30 minutes ago. Anyway, I said that 30 minutes ago. Continuing here. The bond between economics and politics was being revealed. The state, accustomed to appear in the quality of a mystic principle, was operating now oftener and oftener in its most primitive form. That is, in the form of detachment of armed men. Let's repeat that again. The bond between economics and politics was being revealed. The state, accustomed to appear in the quality of a mystic principle, was operating now oftener and oftener in its most primitive form. That is, in the form of detachments of armed men. So basically, the government is sending out armed thugs out in the streets. Police, essentially. The workers in various parts of the country were subjecting the bosses who refused to make concessions or even negotiate, now to enforced appearance before the Soviet, now to house arrest. It is no wonder that the workers' militia became an object of special hatred to the possessing classes. So basically, things are spiraling out of control in Russia, where now it's to the point where workers are going to their boss with demands. Hey, we want higher wages. Hey, we want vacation days. Hey, we want an 8-hour workday. And that big, fat, greedy, piggy capitalist, oink, 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 says, no, no. So what do? They break into his home in the middle of the night, put a black bag over his head like he's going to a CIA black site in the Philippines, take that bag off, and now he's in front of a Soviet of workers. And he wants to, and they're asking, so how about that 8-hour workday, boss? How about that 8-hour workday? I'm just saying, we just have to think of some very unique tactics if we really want to get what we want. We have to think of some unique tactics if we really want to get what we want. I'm going to continue here. The initial decision of the executive committee to arm 10% of the workers had not been carried out, but the workers succeeded in arming partially just the same, and moreover, the more active elements got into the ranks of the militia. The leadership of the workers' militia was concentrated in the hands of the factory committees, and the leadership of the factory committees was coming over more and more into the hands of the Bolsheviks. A worker of the Moscow factory, Postovitchik, relates, on the 1st of June, as soon as the new factory committee was elected with the Bolshevik majority, a detachment of 80 men was formed, which in the absence of weapons, drilled with sticks under the leadership of an old soldier, Comrade Levikov. So just like white men in our America, Russian men like to go out into the woods and play soldier. At least this time they're playing soldier for a good cause, seizing the means of production. In my country, white men go out into the woods to oil each other up, wrestle, do ancient Viking and Norse salutes and shit like that, and pray to their pagan gods and hope for a race war. Meanwhile, their wife is getting fucked by a big black cock. White men in my country go out into the woods and play soldier. Say, I can't wait to just kill a nigger. I can't wait to kill a nigger. Meanwhile, their wife is at home saying, nigga, kill that pussy. Oh, nigga, you killing my pussy. Yes, yes, yes. I love my country, man. I need to go back home. I need to go back home and fuck somebody's wife. Continuing here. The press accused the militia of acts of violence, requisitions, and illegal arrest. It is indubitable that the militia did employ violence. It was created exactly for that. Its crime consisted, however, in resorting to violence, in dealing with the representatives of that class which was not accustomed to be the object of violence and did not want to get accustomed to it. In the Putilov factory, which played the leading role in the struggle for higher wages, a conference assembled on the 23rd of June, in which participated representatives of the Central Council of Factory and Shop Committees, the Central Bureau of the Trade Unions, and 73 plants, under the influence of the Bolsheviks. The conference recognized that the strike of a factory under the given conditions might entail an unorganized political struggle of the Petrograd workers, and therefore proposed to the Putilov workers to restrain their legitimate indignation and prepare their forces for a general attack. All right, so shout out to Just Desserts. Oh, he's going to the Gulag. Oh, that's easy. I'm a country boy. Big country boy. I drink from a mason jar, mama. Anyway, continuing here. On the eve of that important conference, the Bolshevik faction had warned the executive committee, a mass of 40,000 may any day strike and come into the streets. It would already have done so if our party had not restrained it. And moreover, there is no guarantee that in the future we can restrain it. But a coming out of the Putilov men, there can be no doubt of it, will inevitably bring after it an action of the majority of the workers and soldiers. Shout out to Kev. He says, love the jacket. I appreciate that. Hopefully it keeps you engaged to listening to this radical content as we plot on how to kidnap Elon Musk. Yes, we're plotting on how to kidnap Elon Musk. We want to send Jeff Bezos to a CIA black site. That's what we're doing here. We're just plotting on how to commit some crimes. You want to learn how to commit some crimes? Stay tuned. Stay tuned. I'm a big old country boy, mama. Okay, Kev says he's gay, so he probably won't stay. This is not a homophobic channel. I'm not a homophobic person. I have no problem with gay people. I don't know why you would even think that at all. I have love for gay people. I like to think of myself as an ally or an advocate for LGBTQ rights. So if you think that, you're more than welcome to go. But I want everybody to know that all people are welcome here. White, black, Asian, Hispanic, gay, trans, non-binary, whatever. I have no problem with anybody. In fact, I advocate for full equality for our LGBTQ comrades. So say what you want to say, Kev. I will continue here. So the leaders of the executive committee judged these warnings to be demagoguery, or else simply let them go in one ear and out the other, preserving their tranquility. They themselves had almost ceased to visit the factories and barracks, since they had succeeded in making themselves odious in the eyes of the soldiers and workers. Only the Bolsheviks enjoyed sufficient authority to make it possible for them to restrain the workers and soldiers from scattered action. But the impatience of the masses was already sometimes directed, even against the Bolsheviks. Anarchists appeared in the factories and in the fleet. As always, in the face of great events and great masses, they exposed their organic bankruptcy. They found it the more easy to reject the state power in that they completely failed to understand the significance of the Soviets as organs of a new state. Moreover, stunned by the revolution, they most often simply kept mum on the subject of the state. They revealed their bankruptcy for the most part by encouraging petty flare-ups. The economic blind alley and the growing embitterment of the Petrograd workers gave certain points of support to the anarchists. Incapable of seriously appraising the correlation of forces on a national scale, ready to regard every little impulse from below as the last stroke of salvation, they sometimes accused the Bolsheviks of irresolution and even of compromiseism. But beyond grumbling, they usually did not go. The response of the masses to the action of the anarchists sometimes served the Bolsheviks as a gauge of the steam pressure of the revolution. I love how Trotsky randomly talks about the anarchists. Like, they pop up in the book as sort of like, pixies or fairies who just come and do some fuck shit now and then. And I love how Trotsky just considers them like a non-factor. You know what I mean? And I got love for my anarchist comrades. Because at this point in the struggle, we can take any help we get. And there's a lot more that I agree with an anarchist with than almost any other, ideology in general. So, I just love how Trotsky writes about the anarchists as well. So Kev asks, what is your channel's purpose? Well, I'm here to do education. I'm here to learn for myself. As you know, I'm a student here in Budapest, Hungary, studying sociology, going for my second bachelor's degree, and then hopefully my master's, and then my PhD. I got a thesis to write, so I'm working on that, so I should be working on that, but I'm trying to finish up this book. But yeah, this channel is just for education and growth. It's documenting my travels, it's documenting the books I read, the movies I watch, the places I go, and it's just to hopefully help you all grow with me. Learn with me. We're all here to be together and grow together. That's the purpose of this content, of the book react, the movie reviews, the topics of my channel. It's all to cover, these various spheres of human life and activity through a black lens. The world views me as black. I see myself as black, and I can't help but view the world through a black paradigm as well. So that's what you're going to get here. If you like it, you can stay. If you don't like it, you can kick rocks, and we can help you kick rocks by sending you to the gulag. So shout out to Hammerman up in the live stream, and shout out to London, and shout out to Holland up in the live stream as well. Shout out to the Dutch people. Shout out to the London boys. All y'all, man, y'all be cool. Y'all be cool. Anyway, we're continuing here. The sailors who had met Lenin at the Finland station declared 2 weeks later, under patriotic pressure from all sides, if we had known by what ways he came to us, instead of rapturous cries of hurrah, we would have made heard our indignant shouts. Down with you, back to the country you came through. The soldier Soviets to the Crimea threatened one after another to prevent, with armed fists, Lenin's entry into that patriotic peninsula where he had no idea of going. The Volinsky Regiment, the Koryphee of February 27th, in the heat of the moment even resolved to arrest Lenin, so that the executive committee found itself obliged to take its own measures against such an event. Moods of this kind had not finally dissipated up to the June offensive, and they flared up sharply again after the July days. At the same time, in the most faraway garrisons and the most remote parts of the front, the soldiers were speaking more and more boldly in the language of Bolshevism, often enough never guessing it. The Bolsheviks in the regiments were only single individuals, but the Bolshevik slogans were penetrating deeper and deeper. They seemed to be coming up spontaneously in all parts of the country. Liberal observers saw nothing in this but ignorance and chaos. Wretch wrote, "Our fatherland is veritably turning into a sort of madhouse, where those possessed are in action and command, and people who have not yet lost their reason stand aside in fright and cling along the walls." In exactly these words, the moderates have poured out their souls in all revolutions. The compromisers' press comforted itself that the soldiers, in spite of all misunderstanding, did not want to have anything to do with the Bolsheviks. Meanwhile, the unconscious Bolshevism of the mass, reflecting the logic of evolution, was constituting the incomparable power of the Lenin Party. All right? So, shout out to Hammerman up in the live stream. He says, our country is moving into a very frightening time. Far right is really making inroads in Holland, in the Netherlands. It is scary to be black in Europe right now. Throughout the UK, throughout Europe, and throughout even European countries like the UK, yes, the right wing is on the march. Like Nigel Farage in the UK, like I forgot Dirk Wilders. I think his name is Wilders in the Netherlands. There also is a right winger in France who might come to power, Marine Le Pen. She's been running for years, or I think her son is running, Le Pen Jr., whatever. So yeah, it's looking scary right now in Europe, because the European just loves to, they love to kill each other. If there's anything Europeans love to do, they love to kill each other. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just start cannibalizing each other, because the U.S. is pulling out of NATO. Russia is continuing their aggressive, illegal war in Ukraine, slaughtering women and children and innocent civilians in the name of imperial power. So fuck Vladimir Putin. And so, yeah, even here in Hungary, even though they got rid of one right-wing guy, they elected another right-wing guy who's fascistic in his own way. So, yeah, it is scary to be in Europe right now, especially if you're a black person or a Muslim person or a trans person, a gay person, a non-binary person, etc. It's gonna continue to get scary. But I think, once again, the reason white people are moving to the far right is simply because the economic questions, the economic issues that they have are not being sufficiently answered by us leftists. We are not actively engaging with the working class, primarily the European working class. So many of them have felt left behind. Some of them are very antagonistic to left-wing economic ideas because almost half of Europe was under communist rule or the banner of socialism, etc., etc. And some of them have a bad taste in their mouth because they associate that, the repression, the totalitarianism, the authoritarianism with socialism or communism. Though I would argue that is not socialism or communism. That is not the point of it. But we have to remember that the Cold War was happening in America. The West was putting maximum pressure on the socialist countries. Therefore, there was going to be maximum pressure to try to maintain power and hegemony inside. Any state is going to try to do whatever it takes to make sure it survives. So if you have America and Western nations flooding your country with propaganda, flooding your country with dissidents, etc., trying to destabilize your region, of course you're going to do whatever it takes to maintain power. Think about if Russia was dropping leaflets all over America saying, yeah, your country sucks, you don't have freedom, etc., etc. Think about if all the left-wing countries continually broadcasted propaganda and sent money and organized groups of people to destabilize America or other Western capitalistic nations, etc., etc. So yeah, that's what, in my view, just a short view, what happened in a lot of Eastern Europe. But yeah, a lot of white people in Europe are not getting their questions or issues addressed by the left You know what I mean? I would say that's a big part of that is because of the repression. Many leftist groups are actively repressed by their respective governments wherever they operate. So that is one of the reasons. But still, us leftists have to do more in reaching the working class. You know what I'm saying? Last comment I'm going to read from Kev. In UK, many white people, I am one, but don't agree, are saying whites are discriminating and treating them badly. This is what the Reform Party uses as a motivation. Yeah, it's absolutely insane. I heard recently there was a Polish white guy who was murdered in the UK by a Sikh gentleman, a brown-skinned Sikh gentleman who was a police officer. And the white man, I believe, the white Polish man was racially antagonizing the Sikh police officer, and that has now become a new rallying cry for the regressive, stupid right-wingers in the UK, because now they're saying, see, look, bruv, look, mate, see, reverse racism, bruv. The white man is being pressed down by the brown man. Can't you see, bruv? We're going to become a minority in our own island. Meanwhile, the island is 99% white. Jesus Christ. But yeah, it's really crazy what's going down in the UK. I make dua to Allah. I make dua to Allah that all of your crazy crackers in the UK catch hantavirus. I make dua to Allah that all of your racist, right-wing, reactionary idiots who might vote for reform, I hope they all catch bubonic plague. I hope the bubonic plague comes back. Oh, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi. Please bring back bubonic plague. Please bring hantavirus. Please bring Ebola to the British Isles. This is what we need. Ya Allah, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi, Ashhadu Allah Nahan Allah, Ashhadu Anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Please, Allah, bring hantavirus to the UK so that the crack-ass crackers can face their final master. Anyway, that's it. Shout out to Christian Salik. He says, sorry for not joining the stream. I said I was going to watch. Well, you tuned in at the right time. We're wrapping up this chapter very soon where Lenin and Trotsky are talking about, the workers arresting their bosses and whipping on them and kidnapping the millionaires. It's been a very interesting chapter so far. Hammerman says exactly 100. Shout out to Hammerman up in the live stream and everybody else joining. Let's continue here reading what Trotsky says. The soldier, Pereiko, relates how, at the elections at the front to the Congress of Soviets, after a 3-day debate, only social revolutionaries were elected. But right after that, notwithstanding the protest of the leaders, the soldiers adopted a resolution in favor of taking the land from the landlords without waiting for the Constituent Assembly. In general, on questions which the soldiers understood, they were inclined farther to the left than the most extreme of extreme Bolsheviks. That is what Lenin had in mind when he said that the masses are 100 times to the left of us. A clerk in a motorcycle shop somewhere in the Tauride province tells how, not infrequently after reading the bourgeois papers, the soldiers would abuse some sort of unknown creatures called Bolsheviks, and then immediately take up the discussion of the necessity of stopping the war, seizing the land from the landlords, etc. These were the same patriots who swore not to let Lenin into the Crimea. The soldiers in the gigantic rear garrisons were chafing. A vast accumulation of idle people impatiently awaiting a change in their fate created a nervous condition that expressed itself in a continuous readiness to bring their discontent out into the street, in wholesale tramway rides and an epidemical chewing of sunflower seeds. The soldier, with his trench coat thrown over his shoulders, with the seed shell on his lip, became the most hated image to the bourgeois press. This man, whom in wartime they had crudely flattered, naming him no less than a hero, which did not prevent their flogging this hero at the front. He whom after the February Revolution they had lifted aloft as a liberator, became suddenly a thug, a traitor, a gunman, a German agent. Really, there was no vileness that the patriotic press would not attribute to the Russian soldiers and sailors. Very interesting. So once again, I've said this in the previous live stream, we understand that most of the time people who join our modern armies are very close to like poor young men who don't have another way of economic upward mobility, right? And it probably was not that much different in Russia. Yes, there was a draft in Russia. They were just catching people and sending them to the front with no shoes and no guns, etc., and getting them killed. But still, when you're in the army, they grind it into you. Love of country, patriotism, and stuff like that. And what does Trotsky say here? What does Trotsky say here? The communists, the Bolsheviks at that time were doing such good propaganda that a kid from the country that probably didn't have much education, had only been told to shoot and kill and love the flag and love the nation and all that. He reads the Bolshevik paper, he reads the communist paper, and is actually saying like, yo, we should end the war. The workers need to seize control of the factories. The peasants need control of the land. We create the wealth, so we deserve the wealth. That's how good of a propaganda machine the Communist Party was at the time. The Bolsheviks were at the time. And this should inspire us today to get on our fucking game. We shouldn't just be yelling all cops are bastards and all soldiers in the U.S. Army are baby killers and mercenaries. We should actually be trying to reach them. Should actually be trying to reach and propagandize to the soldiers. But I digress. Let's go to the comments here. Kev says, I think all of this is irrelevant. The only future for the human race is to love each other and stop all hatred. Full stop. It's fundamentally laughed at, but it's truly the only way, not religious. I agree with you, Kev, and that's why we need communism, because capitalism begets hatred. Capitalism begets racism. Capitalism begets sexism. Capitalism begets homophobia. So the only way we can actually have a unified human race, the only way we can actually love each other is if we can actually get these sick, twisted, blood-sucking bastards off our back who tell us in the media that black people and white people hate each other. That people from the global south are coming to take your jobs. Meanwhile, those same rich billionaires are importing the people to take your jobs. So yes, we have to kill capitalism to actually bring all people together. We can't just say we're going to love each other, because we've been loving each other. White people been loving each other. There's nothing white people love more than an orgy. Bacchanalia, Saturnalia, the origins of Christmas. Have you ever found out the origins of Christmas? The reason we celebrate Christmas on that day is because back in the days, the Romans used to have a big old orgy at that time. And that party was so popular that when Christianity came, the Pope had to say, yeah, we're going to put this day when Jesus was born on the orgy day, because people really like that day. Okay? So Christian Shalek says, why not bring the USSR back? Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it in the United States. The United States of Soviet Republics. The United States of Soviet Republics. This is what we should be looking for. Not looking backwards. That's one of the major problems of us modern day communists and socialists. We look backwards. We want to put on the big fucking Russian poofy hats. We want to wear a fucking stupid star cap. We want to fucking LARP and play like we're living in Soviet times and shit like that, instead of actually trying to make some shit happen now. You know what I mean? This is one of the beautiful things about being black, low key. Because white people, I'm going to keep it real, man. This is why I don't think Christian Shalek, you're going to like my channel, because I keep it real. I'm going to be spanking on the leftists just as much as I do the fascists. Well, not as much as I do the fascists, but with some tough love for us leftists right now. I'm drawing from the black radical tradition. We've never had successful states to look back to or anything in the past. Everything is all fiction to us. Our past is all fiction because white folks wiped it all out during the transatlantic slave trade, which was the beginning of capitalism and our global economic system as it stands. So we have no past to look back to, because the past is really all fictional. We can talk about Mansa Musa and pyramids and shit like that, but really all we have is the shit that we've been able to create right now. And since I'm drawing from the black radical tradition, it comes a lot from the imagination that we could create a better society rather than looking back at some shit in the past. We have no past to look back to. And if the past that we're looking back to is Black Wall Street, then God help us. God fucking help us. God save us all. Sorry for that rant. But yes, let's bring the USSR back by the United States of Socialist Republics. I like that. But if you disagree, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. Let's go here. Trotsky says, all right, all the executive committee did was to justify itself, struggle with anarchy, abate excesses, distribute frightened questionnaires and moral instructions. The president of the Soviet in Saratsin, that city was considered a nest of anarcho-Bolshevism. To a questionnaire from the center as to the state of affairs, answered with a clean-cut phrase: the more the garrison goes to the left, the more the everyday man goes to the right. You can extend this formula from Saratsin to the whole country. The soldier is moving to the left, the bourgeois to the right. Every soldier who expressed a little more boldly than the rest what they were all feeling was so persistently shouted at from above as a Bolshevik that he was obliged in the long run to believe it. From peace and land, the soldiers' thoughts began to pass over to the question of power. Responsiveness to the scattered slogans of Bolshevism changed into a conscious sympathy for the Bolshevik Party. In the Volynsky Regiment, which in April had intended to arrest Lenin, the mood shifted in the course of 2 months in favor of the Bolsheviks. The same in the Agursky and Litovsky regiments. The Lettish sharpshooters had been brought into being by the autocracy in order to use for the ends of war the hatred of parceled out peasants and farmhands against the Baltic barons. These regiments fought magnificently, but that spirit of class hatred on which the monarchy thought to rely found a road of its own. The Lettish sharpshooters were among the first to break with the monarchy and afterward with the compromisers. As early as May 17th, the representatives of 8 Lettish regiments almost unanimously adhered to the Bolshevik slogan, "All power to the Soviets." In the further course of the revolution, they will play a mighty role. Okay? So, let's go here to the comments. All right. Hammerman says, thank you. I don't know thank you for what. Look, Christian says, low-key, the USSR was just better in the Cold War. I don't know what that means. Hammerman says, me too. Okay. Socialism is not work for me. I have no idea what y'all saying. Y'all need to learn some better English, man. This English is horrible. I thought in Holland and in other parts of the world, y'all got some good English skills. I have no idea what you boys are saying. Y'all just over here mumbling, boy. I swear to God. Ain't that a shame? Okay, my computer is about to die, so I might not see the horizontal live stream, unfortunately, after a minute. Okay, but let's continue with this chapter. All right. So, an unknown soldier writes from the front. Today, June 13th, we had a little meeting at headquarters, and they talked to Lenin and Kerensky. The soldiers, for the most part, were for Lenin, but the officers said that Lenin was very bourgeois. After the collapse of the offensive, Kerensky's name became utterly hateful to the army. I think he means bourgeois. It's funny, the officer said that Lenin was bourgeois. Okay. On June 21st, the military students in Peterhof marched through the streets with banners and placards. Down with the spies. Long live Kerensky and Brusilov. It was Brusilov, of course, that the military students themselves stood for. Soldiers of the 4th Battalion attacked the military students and roughhoused them, scattered their demonstration. The placard in honor of Kerensky was what provoked the most hatred. The June demonstration greatly accelerated the political evolution of the army. The popularity of the Bolsheviks, the only party which had raised its voice in advance against the offensive, began to grow with extraordinary speed. It is true that the Bolshevik papers only with great difficulty found access to the army. Let's repeat that. It is true that the Bolshevik papers only with great difficulty found access to the army. Their circulation was extremely small in comparison with the liberal press and the patriotic press in general. There is not even one of your papers to be seen anywhere, writes to Moscow a clumsy soldier's hand, and we only make use of the rumor of your papers. They sprinkle us here with free bourgeois papers, carrying them along the front in whole bales. But it was just these patriotic papers which gave the Bolsheviks an incomparable popularity. Every case of protest from the oppressed, of land seizure, of accounts squared with the hated officers, these papers attributed to Bolsheviks. The soldiers concluded that the Bolsheviks are a righteous folk. Very interesting. So, once again, we need to be propagandizing to soldiers. And that doesn't mean that we need to just have mass media to be able to do it, even though with the internet and social media, it makes it much easier. You know what I'm saying? People can find you on their feed or algorithm if the content is good. But once again, the soldiers didn't really see these Bolshevik papers. But anytime somebody got the Bolshevik papers, they were probably sharing it with their homeboys, like it was Playboy or something like that, because probably it was illicit, it was a little bit dangerous, it was contraband, you know what I mean? You got some flicks, You got some naked pics from the chicks back home, and you got the Bolshevik paper. You know what I'm saying? That's probably how it was going down in the barracks. You know what I'm saying? So like 3 or 4 guys are just reading this together, passing it to the next homeboy, and then they get radicalized. You know what I'm saying? So we have to use to our advantage the fact that communist is a dirty word. You know what I'm saying? That's probably one of the biggest strikes against us communists and Marxists. People naturally hear these words and have all sorts of negative connotations with it. You know what I'm saying? And we have to be able to use that to our advantage. Sure, communism is a dirty word. Communists are seen as dangerous and radical. But guess what? A lot of people like shit that's dangerous and radical. Why do you think hip-hop became so successful? I don't think people realize how big anti-black racism is in the world. A lot of people are naturally scared of black men. If there's 3 or 4 black guys that walk into a bar and it's nothing but white people, everybody starts turning and looking at them. Trust me, I'm here in Hungary, and I see it happen all the time. When I walk in with my homeboys, or when somebody else's group comes in, everybody starts looking at them, everybody starts tensing up, whispering to each other and shit like that. The world is scared of black men. But guess what's the most popular art form in the world? An art form that centers black men at the front, hip-hop. And other art forms, the blues, jazz, rock and roll. Danger creates excitement. So us communists should actually be embracing the fact that we are seen as a bit dangerous, radical, mysterious, shit like that. Because the Bolsheviks probably use that to their advantage to propagandize to the soldiers. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, going here, Hammerman says, you are a teacher. Yes, I'm an English teacher. And you need English class. You need English class. Holla at me if you want some English classes. My email is simonnhill90@gmail. simonnhill90@gmail. If you want some private English classes, holla at your boy. Anyway, continuing here. The commissar of the 12th Army reports to Kerensky at the beginning of July as to the mood of the soldiers. Everything is in the long run blamed on the bourgeois ministers and the Soviet, which has sold out to the bourgeoisie. But in general, in the immense mass is an opaque darkness. I am unhappy to report that even the newspapers are but little read lately. Complete distrust of the printed word. They write pretty. They are good at the tall talk. In the first months, the reports of the patriotic commissars were ordinarily a hymn to the Revolutionary Army, its consciousness, its discipline. Then, after 4 months of uninterrupted disappointments, when the army had lost confidence in the government, orators, and journalists, these same commissars discovered in it nothing but opaque darkness. Christian Solik says, you should be a historian. Well, I'm training to be a sociologist. So I do plan on having a career in academia, hopefully in a few years. I'm trying to get my PhD in the long run, but wish me luck. I'm trying, bruh. I'm trying. The more the garrison moves to the left, the more the everyday man moves to the right. Stimulated by the offensive, counter-revolutionary unions sprang up in Petrograd like mushrooms after rain. They gave themselves names, one more resonant than the other. Union of the Honor of the Fatherland, Union of Military Duty, Battalion of Freedom, Organization of the Spirit, etc. These admirable signboards concealed the ambitions and attempts of the nobility, the officers, the officialdom, the bureaucracy, the bourgeoisie. Some of these organizations, such as the Military League, the Union of the Cavaliers of St. George, or the Volunteers Division, were the finished nuclei of a military plot, coming forward as flaming patriots. These knights of honor and the spirit not only found easy access to the Allied missions, but even at times received governmental subsidies, a thing which had in its day been refused to the Soviet as a private organization. One of the offshoots of the family of the newspaper magnate Suvorin undertook the publication in those days of a little newspaper, which as an organ of independent socialism advocated an iron dictatorship, advancing Admiral Kolchak as its candidate. The more solid press, without as yet quite dotting its I's, tried in every way to create a popularity for Kolchak. The further career of the admiral testifies that already in the summer of 1917, there was a broad plan connected with his name, and that there were influential circles behind Suverin's back. In obedience to a simple tactical calculation, the reaction, aside from certain individual explosions, pretended that it was directing its blows only against Leninists. The word Bolshevik became a synonym for satanic origin. Just as before the revolution, the Tsarist commanders had put the responsibility for all misfortunes, including their own stupidity, upon German spies and more particularly upon Yids. So now, after the collapse of the June offensive, the blame for failure and defeat was unceasingly laid upon Bolsheviks. In this matter, Democrats such as Kerensky and Tseretelli were almost in no wise distinguished, not only from liberals like Milikov, but from the outspoken feudalists like General Denikin. All right? Very interesting. So what Trotsky is saying here is that Russia was losing the war. They're still trying to continue the war after the February Revolution. And, they're now blaming, like they always do, the Jews, or they start blaming foreign enemies, which is what every fascist regime does. In this case, bourgeois, monarchist, etc., etc. And now, because the Bolsheviks are gaining power, now all that's being heaped on them. Oh, guys, we're losing this war because of these goddamn communists. These goddamn communists who are only 10 in number in the country. They're running things. They're making us lose. Isn't that ridiculous? Shout out to Christian Salik. He said, I should watch you more. Tune on in, buddy. You can tune on in and catch up all the previous live streams. We're posting almost every day. There's shorts feeds. There's posts on the channel. There's videos that are going up. There's a lot of content for you to watch. So you should tune in more. You should also share the content too. But keep it a secret because you don't want to get caught by the secret police in your company for listening to a dirty communist. Keep it a secret though. Maybe don't share. Don't share the content. Don't share the content. You don't want the people to know that you're tuned into a goddamn dirty commie. All right, continuing here. As always happens when contradictions are intensified to the limit, but the moment of explosion has not yet come. The grouping of political forces revealed itself more frankly and clearly, not on fundamental questions, but on accidental side issues. One of the lightning rods for the diversion of political passions in those days was Kronstadt, that old fortress, which was to have been a loyal sentry at the sea gates of the imperial capital, had in the past more than once lifted the banner of revolt. In spite of ruthless vengeance, the flame of rebellion never went out in Kronstadt. It flared up threateningly after the revolution. The name of this naval fortress soon became, on the page of the patriotic press, a synonym of the worst aspect of the revolution, a synonym of Bolshevism. In reality, the Kronstadt Soviet was not yet Bolshevik. It contained in May 107 Bolsheviks, 112 Social Revolutionaries, 30 Mensheviks, and 97 non-party men. But these were Kronstadt Social Revolutionaries and Kronstadt non-party men living under high pressure. A majority of them on important questions followed the Bolsheviks. In the political sphere, the Kronstadt sailors were not inclined either toward maneuvering or toward diplomacy. They had their own rule, no sooner said than done. It is no wonder that, in relation to a phantom government, they tended toward an extremely simplified method of action. On May 13th, the Soviet resolved, the sole power in Kronstadt is the Soviet of Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies. The removal of the government commissar, the cadet Papaleyev, who occupied the position of fifth wheel in a wagon, passed off in the fortress totally unnoticed. Model order was maintained. Card playing in the city was forbidden. All brothels were closed, and their inmates deported. Under threat of confiscation of property and banishment to the front, the Soviet forbade drunkenness in the streets. The threat was more than once carried into action. Tempered in the terrible regime of the Tsarist fleet and the naval fortress, accustomed to stern work, to sacrifices, but also to fury, these sailors, now when the curtain of the new life was beginning to rise before them, a life in which they felt themselves to be the coming masters, tightened all their sinews in order to prove themselves worthy of the revolution. They thirstily threw themselves upon both friends and enemies in Petrograd and almost dragged them by force into Kronstadt in order to show them what revolutionary seamen are in action. Such moral tension could not, of course, last forever, but it lasted a long time. The Kronstadt sailors became a kind of fighting crusaders of the revolution. But what revolution? Not that, in any case, which was incarnated in the minister Tseretelli and his commissar Papaleyev. Kronstadt stood there as a herald of the advancing Second Revolution. For that reason, it was hated by all those whom the First Revolution had been more than enough. Very interesting. So that sounds essentially like an autonomous zone. There are some leftists that say, hey, we should seize land. You know, we don't need to overthrow the entire U.S. government. We should just seize a city. The entire city of Memphis belongs to us now. We created the Memphis Autonomous Zone. We create the new laws, etc., here. And that sounds like what happened here in Kronstadt. The sailors, the soldiers there, seized the city and started implementing some new laws, which is interesting, which is very important, I guess, because that's essentially what the Soviets were. You know, the Workers' Council essentially saying we're creating a new government. But that cannot last forever. Okay, this is my disagreement with the anarchists. The anarchists say, you know, we should just, you know, destroy the systems of power as they exist now, and we'll create hierarchy that's more, you know, horizontal, right? Horizontal hierarchy, or, you know, more even playing fields, et cetera, right? But essentially, I think we do need state control until the dissolution of the state after some time. Okay, so should I delete the share to my friends then? No, I was joking, Christian Schalik. You don't need to delete the share with your friends. Share it with your friends. Share it with your mama. Send it to Granny. Send it to Granny. Grannies love me. I know the family was killed in Siberia. Probably, I don't know, because my history teacher said that. Are you talking about the Romanov family, the Russian the Russian royal family? I don't know if they were killed in Siberia or if they were just gunned down in the castle. I think they were just killed in the castle. Anyway, so the peaceful and unnoticed removal of Pepelayev was portrayed in the press of the existing order almost as an armed insurrection against the unity of the state. The government complained to the Soviet. The Soviet immediately appointed a delegation to exert influence. The machine of the double sovereignty came into action with the Creek. On May 24th, the Kronstadt Soviet, with Tsetserelli and Skobelev present, agreed upon the insistence of the Bolsheviks to acknowledge that in prolonging its struggle for the power of the Soviets, it was practically obliged to submit to the power of the Provisional Government until the power of the Soviets was established throughout the land. However, the next day, under pressure from the sailors, indignant at this submissiveness, the Soviet announced that the minister had received only an explanation of the points of view of Kronstadt, which remained unchanged. This was clearly a tactical mistake, but one behind which nothing was concealed except revolutionary ambition. It was decided up above to make use of this lucky chance to give the Kronstadters a lesson, making them pay at the same time for their previous sins. The prosecutor, of course, was Tsetserelli. With heartbreaking reference to his prison days, Tsetserelli thundered especially against the Kronstadters for holding 80 officers behind the fortress bars. All the virtuous press backed him up. However, even the compromisist, that is, the ministerial papers, had to acknowledge that it was a question of direct embezzlement and of men who carried first rule to a point of horror. The sailor witnesses, according to Izvestia, the official paper of Tsetserelli himself, testified to the putting down by the arrested officers of the insurrection of 1906 to mass shootings, to barges filled with the corpses of men executed and drowned in the sea, and to other horrors. They tell these things quite simply as of everyday events. The Kronstadters stubbornly refused to give up the arrestees to the government, to whom the hangmen and the percolators of noble birth were incomparably nearer than were those tortured sailors of 1906 and other years. It was no accident that the Minister of Justice, Perevezev, whom Sukhanov mildly describes as one of the most suspicious figures in the coalition government, systematically liberated from the Peter and Paul fortress the vilest agents of the Tsarist political police. The democratic upstarts were above all striving to compel the reactionary bureaucracy to acknowledge their nobleness. To Tsetserelli's indictment, the Kronstadters answered in their appeal. The officers, gendarmes, and police arrested by us in the days of the revolution have themselves declared to representatives of the government that they have nothing to complain of in the treatment they have received from the prison management. It is true that the prison buildings of Kronstadt are horrible, but those are the same prisons which were built by the Tsarism for us. We haven't any others. And if we keep enemies of the people in those prisons, it is not out of vengeance, but from consideration of revolutionary self-preservation. All right, shout out to Hammerman. He says, school don't teach you everything. You have to teach yourself. Facts. Absolutely. And my school told me that Russia was an evil, dark place where dirty communists lived who just wanted to take away your freedom. And there's no dick sucking in Russia. You can't get sloppy toppy from two Dominican mommies. You can't do that in Russia. That's what I was told. And I realized it's a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie. Because they got bad Cuban mommies that came over to study in Moscow and they giving sloppy toppy in the dorm rooms. Anyway, on the 27th of May, the Petrograd Soviet tried the Kronstadters. Appearing in their defense, Trotsky warned Cesarelli that in case of danger, when a counter-revolutionary general tries to throw a noose around the neck of the revolution, the cadets will soap the rope, and the Kronstadt sailors will come to fight and die with us. This warning came true 3 months later with unexpected literalness when General Kornilov raised his revolt and led troops against the capital. Kerensky, Cesarelli, and Skobelev summoned the Kronstadt sailors to defend the Winter Palace. But what of that? In June, the Democratic gentlemen were defending law and order against anarchy, and no arguments or prophecies had weight with them. By a majority of 580 votes against 162, with 74 abstaining, Cesarelli carried through the Petrograd Soviet a resolution denouncing the apostasy of anarchist Kronstadt from the revolutionary democracy. No sooner had the impatiently awaited news reached the Mariinsky Palace that this bull of excommunication had been adopted than the government immediately cut off telephone communication for private people between the capital and the fortress in order to prevent the Bolshevik center from influencing the Kronstadters, ordered all the training ships to leave the Kronstadt waters, and demanded of its Soviet unconditional submission. The Congress of Peasant Deputies, sitting at that time, threatened to refuse foodstuffs to Kronstadt. The reactions standing behind the back of the compromisers sought a decisive and, to the extent possible, bloody settlement. All right. Christian Solik says, T, yes, finally. Okay, I don't know what you mean, T. I don't know what you mean by T, okay? Anyway, the reckless step of the Kronstadt Soviet, writes one of the young historians, Yugov, might have brought undesirable consequences. It was necessary to find a suitable way to get out of the situation created. With this aim, Trotsky went to Kronstadt, where he addressed the Soviet and wrote a declaration, which was adopted by the Soviet and afterward carried unanimously by Trotsky at a meeting on Yakorny Square. Preserving their position in principle, the Kronstadters yielded upon the practical issue. The peaceful settlement of the conflict left the bourgeois press completely beside themselves. There is anarchy in the fortress. The Kronstadters are printing their own money. Fantastic specimens of it were reproduced in the papers. They are plundering state property. The women are nationalized. Robberies and drunken orgies are in progress. The sailors, so proud of their austere order, doubled their horny fist on reading these papers, which in millions of copies were distributing slander against them throughout all Russia. Having got the Kronstadt officers in their hands, the judicial institutions of Pereverzev freed them one after another. It would be very instructive to find out how many of them subsequently participated in the Civil War, and how many sailors, soldiers, workers, and peasants were shot and hanged by them. Unfortunately, we are not here in a position to carry out this instructive census. All right? Okay. He says, terrorist. I have no idea what you mean, Christian Solik, what you mean by terrorist. All right. Unfortunately, we are not here in a position to carry out this instructive census. The authority of the government was saved, but the sailors soon got satisfaction from the indignity suffered. From all corners of the country, there began to arrive resolutions of greeting to Red Kronstadt, from individual left Soviets, from factories, regiments, mass meetings. The 1st Machine Gun Regiment demonstrated in solid ranks on the streets of Petrograd its respect for the Kronstadters, for their firm attitude of non-confidence in the Provisional Government. Kronstadt was getting ready, however, to take a more significant revenge. The baiting of the bourgeois press had made it a factor of all national importance. Fortifying itself in Kronstadt, writes Milikov, Bolshevism, with the help of suitably trained agitators, threw out wildly over Russia a net of propaganda. Kronstadt emissaries were sent also to the front, where they undermined discipline, and to the rear, into the village, where they incited to the sacking of estates. The Kronstadt Soviet gave these emissaries special mandates. NN has been sent to this province to be present with the right of a deciding vote in the county, district, and village committees, and also to speak at meetings and call meetings at his own discretion wherever he wants to, with the right to bear arms, with unhindered and free transportation on all railroads and steamships. And therewith the inviolability of the person of the said agitator is guaranteed by the Soviet of the city of Kronstadt. In exposing undermining work of the Baltic sailors, Milikov only forgets to explain how and why, notwithstanding the presence of learned authorities, institutions, and newspapers, solitary sailors, armed with this strange mandate of the Kronstadt Soviet, traveled all over the country without hindrance, found food and lodging everywhere, were admitted to all popular meetings, everywhere attentively listened to, and left the imprint of a sailor's hand on the events of history. The historian in the service of liberal politics does not ask himself this simple question. But the Kronstadt miracle was unthinkable only because the sailors far more deeply expressed the demands of historic evolution than the very intelligent professors. The semi-literate mandate was, to speak in the language of Hegel, real because it was reasonable, whereas the subjectively most intelligent plans were spectral because the reason of history was not even camping in them for the night. Very interesting and very inspirational what the Kronstadt sailors did, seizing their city, implementing laws, and starting socialism, beginning socialism in practice. Let's see how many more pages are left in this chapter. Okay, we only have 3 more pages left, actually 2.5. So if you have any questions or comments for me, put it in the chat. I will try to read it before we close up this live stream. We might be on live for about 5 more minutes or so as we finish up these last pages. It's been a very interesting and fun live stream with you all here. So any comments, let me know. Let's wrap this up. The Soviets lag behind the shop committees. The shop committees lag behind the masses. The soldiers lag behind the workers. Still, more of the provinces lagged behind the capital. Such is the inevitable dynamic of a revolutionary process, which creates thousands of contradictions only in order accidentally and in passing, as though in play to resolve them and immediately create new ones. The party also lags behind the revolutionary dynamic, an organization that has the least right to lag, especially in a time of revolution. In such workers' centers as Ekaterinburg, Perm, Tula, Nizhny Novgorod, Somorovo, Kolomna, Yuzovka, the Bolsheviks separated from the Mensheviks only at the end of May. In Odessa, Nikolaev, Elizavetsgrad, Poltava, and other points in the Ukraine, the Bolsheviks did not have the independent organizations even in the middle of June. In Baku, Zalatusht, Bezhetsk, Kostroma, the Bolsheviks divided from the Mensheviks only toward the end of June. These facts cannot but seem surprising when you take into consideration that within 4 months, the Bolsheviks are going to seize the power. How far the party during the war had fallen behind the molecular process in the masses, and how far the March leadership of Kamenev and Stalin lagged behind the gigantic historic tasks. The most revolutionary party that human history until this time had ever known was nevertheless caught unawares by the events of history. It reconstructed itself in the fires and straightened out its ranks under the onslaught of events. The masses at the turning point were 100 times to the left of the extreme left party. The growth of the Bolshevik influence, which took place with the force of a natural historic process, reveals its own contradiction upon a closer examination. Its zigzags, its ebbs and flows. The masses are not homogeneous, and moreover, they learn to handle the fire of revolution only by burning their hands and jumping away. The Bolsheviks could only accelerate the process of education of the masses. They patiently explained, and history this time did not take advantage of their patience. While the Bolsheviks were resolutely winning the shops, factories, and regiments, the elections to the Democratic Dumas gave an enormous, apparently growing advantage to the compromisers. This was one of the sharpest and most enigmatical contradictions of the revolution. To be sure, the Duma of the Vyborg district, which was purely proletarian, prided itself upon its Bolshevik majority. But that was an exception. In the city elections, upon its Bolshevik majority, but that was an exception. Sorry. To be sure, the Duma of the Vyborg district, which was purely proletarian, prided itself upon its Bolshevik majority. But that was an exception. In the city elections of Moscow in June, the Social Revolutionaries got more than 60% of the votes. They themselves were astonished at this figure, for they could not but feel that their influence was swiftly dwindling. In the effort to understand the mutual relation between the real development of the revolution and its reflection in the mirrors of democracy, the Moscow elections have an extraordinary interest. The vast layers of workers and soldiers were already hastily shaking off their compromisist illusions. Meanwhile, the broadest layers of the small-town people were also beginning to stir. For these scattered masses, the democratic elections offered almost the first, and in any case one of the very rare opportunities to show themselves politically. While the worker, yesterday's Menshevik or Social Revolutionary, gave his vote to the Bolshevik Party and drew the soldier along with him, the cabman, the delivery man, the janitor, the market woman, the shopkeeper, his assistant, the teacher, in performing so heroic a deed as giving their vote to the Social Revolutionaries, for the first time emerged from political non-existence. The petty bourgeois layers belatedly voted for Kerensky because he personified in their eyes the February Revolution, which had only today seeped down to them. With its 60% social revolutionary majority, the Moscow Duma glowed with the last flare of a dying luminary. It was so also with all the other organs of democratic self-administration. Having barely arrived, they were already stricken with the impotence of belatedness. That meant that the course of the revolution depended upon the workers and soldiers, and not upon that human dust which had been kicked up and was dancing in the whirlwind of the revolution. Final paragraph right here. Any comments, questions? Put it in the chat before we get out of here. Such is the deep and, at the same time, simple dialectic of the revolutionary awakening of the oppressed classes. The most dangerous of the aberrations of the revolution arises when the mechanical accounts of democracy balances in one column yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and thereby impels the formal Democrats to look for the head of the revolution, where in reality is to be found its very heavy tail. Lenin taught his party to distinguish head from tail. So very inspirational what Trotsky is saying right here. The Bolsheviks were never popular. They didn't even win the Moscow elections after the February Revolution. They were never electorally, just voted in. You know what I'm saying? At least so far in the story. So yeah, this should give us inspiration right now. You don't have to be the most popular person to be the most influential. You don't have to have the most popular group to have the biggest impact. That's what I'm taking from that. And also, the people will continually show you the way. If the people are moving left, the party should be moving left. You get what I'm saying? The people are always going to be on the left because the people want more of their wealth that they create in this capitalistic system. So we're going to shut down this live stream. It's been very fun. My computer just died, so I'm unable to see the poll results, unfortunately. I have a very janky laptop that needs a new charger. So unfortunately, I'm not able to check what people are writing in the horizontal live stream or even what the poll results were for the vertical live stream. I don't know what it is. Probably wasn't good because, as you know, the larger the live stream, the more the fascists and trolls come in. So I wouldn't be surprised if the results of the polls just so that fascism won. Whatever. I don't care. The point is, after the live stream, all of your comments are deleted. The polls are gone. So it's like, a sand castle on the beach. It's nothing. But I want to give a shout out to everybody who did show love. Shout out to Kirkham Down Stalin up in the horizontal live stream. Shout out to Kareth in the horizontal live stream. And shout out to everybody here. Shout out to Christian Solik. Shout out to Hammerman up in the live stream. Shout out to Kev up in the live stream. Shout out to... Who else? Who else came in the live stream? Dark Shial, Mr. Arali, everybody up in the live stream who joined in. Okay? Y'all be easy out there. All power to the people, and peace.